On April 2nd, 2025, in Frisco, Texas, at a track meet, an incident happened between two 17-year-old boys who went to different high schools. Both boys were spectators at the track event, and one of the boys, who is now charged with murder, is named Karmelo Anthony. He's accused of entering and staying in a tented area that was designated for another school. A student in that tented area named Metcalf approached Karmelo, asked him to leave the area, and an incident occurred between the two where they disagreed about, whether or not Karmelo could be in that tented area. So witnesses say that Austin put his hands on Karmelo. Witnesses say that Karmelo reached into a backpack that he had with him, and around that time, kind of stories are a little bit different at this point, but around that time, Karmelo told Austin something along the lines of, put your hands on me and see what happens, or punch me and see what happens, something along those lines. Some witnesses say that Austin did, in fact, put his hands on Karmelo. Karmelo responds by pulling out a knife and stabbing Austin in the chest. Sadly, Austin's brother Hunter tried to save Austin by pressing on his wound and trying to stop the bleeding, but Austin died pretty quickly there in the stands. Hunter wasn't able to save him. Police were quickly able to find and apprehend Karmelo. Witnesses say that he either dropped or threw the knife in the stadium area, so police were able to find that too. It was raining that day, so there's some question about, whether the knife is going to still have valuable evidence on it, but police will, I'm sure, be testing that to find, and will have answers to those kinds of questions. Witnesses were able to point police in the direction of Karmelo. They were able to apprehend him quickly. When they did, Karmelo Anthony made a number of statements. He said things like, he put his hands on me, meaning Austin. It sounds like Karmelo probably heard police radio talking back and forth and heard them say, I got him, I got the alleged suspect. Karmelo responds by saying, I'm not alleged, I did it. Prosecutors are likely going to be able to use these statements against Karmelo. When a person is in custody and questioned by a police officer, they do have to be read their rights that we commonly call Miranda rights, or their warnings against self-incrimination. When a person's in custody but they start talking and it's not in response to any questions from law enforcement, it's just things that they're saying on their own or voluntary statements that they're making, police don't have to read them their Miranda warnings at that time. They don't have to tell them their rights against self-incrimination. Anything that a person says under those circumstances that they just kind of blurt out, those statements are generally admissible to be used against a person, even without warnings. Karmelo, being 17 years old, he's in the jail in Collin County, Texas. He's being held on a $1 million bail. His attorneys have filed a motion to reduce his bail, citing $1 million as excessive and more than he can pay at this point. At this point, Karmelo Anthony is charged with murder, intentionally or knowingly causing the death of another, and they'll say that's by stabbing Austin Metcalf. In Texas, the punishment for murder can be anywhere between 5 years and 99 years or life in prison, and up to a $10,000 fine. It's a first-degree felony in Texas. It seems pretty clear at this point, even though we're still in the early days, that self-defense is going to be a main issue. It sounds like that's going to be one of the defenses that Karmelo Anthony claims throughout his case or trial. In Texas, self-defense is a recognized defense, and there is kind of what we call standard self-defense or basic self-defense, where a person has a right to defend themselves against another person when that person is threatening them or makes the person feel in danger or initiates a fight or initiates some sort of, unwanted physical contact, harms a person. The person who's defending themselves can respond in kind. The law says that words are not enough to justify self-defense. So one person using words to escalate a situation, the actor can't then respond with physical force and claim self-defense because words alone are not enough. If one person puts hands on another, punches, grabs, shoves, the person can respond with sort of equal force. They can't escalate, but they can respond with equal force and then could have the right to claim self-defense. Texas also recognizes a version of self-defense for deadly force, but deadly force has to be used sort of to prevent deadly force from another. Sort of like how words are not enough provocation to justify self-defense, force or bodily injury or laying hands on another without a weapon is not enough to justify reaction of deadly force and still claim self-defense. So a person can't respond using deadly force or using a weapon to counteract a physical fight that would otherwise just be a basic assault. Now, that's not to say the only situation in which deadly force can be used in a self-defense claim has to be where there is a weapon. There doesn't have to be a weapon for a person to claim self-defense using deadly force, but the assault, the danger on them has to be so significant and so serious and so imminent that they truly feel like deadly force is the only appropriate reaction in order to save themselves. It has to be a fight or an assault so severe that they feel like the only way to defend themselves is to use deadly force. So when we think about what happens next and where this case is going to go, this is going to be a long, drawn-out process, but there are a lot of steps along the way. One step that we can anticipate coming probably pretty quickly is that Karmelo Anthony's attorneys will probably try to speak to the judge and the prosecutors about getting his bond lowered. $1 million is a high bond. Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not. When we talk about bond is not meant to be punitive. Bond is not meant to be a punishment for someone. The idea of bond is to make sure that someone has so much invested in a case that they do return for court. Now, when we're talking about a 17-year-old who is currently in jail, probably doesn't have a lot of assets, probably doesn't have a lot of resources of his own. So to think that Karmelo Anthony of his own accord can come up with $1 million to make bonds, probably not very likely. And that's probably why his attorneys are requesting a lower bond. Of course, we know that family members will help, or family members often chip in or try to contribute to a bond for another loved one. But bond really is meant to be for the defendant themselves to be able to make without really considering contributions from family. So I'm sure that's what the attorneys are thinking when they're asking for that lower bond. So our understanding at this time is that Karmelo Anthony's family has been raising money to contribute to his defense. If Karmelo is able to bond out, it's very likely that the court would put a number of bond conditions on him. Bond conditions can be anything that the judge deems reasonable to make sure that the community is safe while the defendant is on bond, and again, to ensure that the defendant returns to court. So common bond conditions include things like a GPS electronic monitor, drug testing, potentially people are not able to leave the county or the state or the area or things like that, regular check-ins. Given his young age, it could even be a curfew or requiring him to attend school regularly, not miss any classes. Could even include things like mental health evaluations or, counseling or different things like that. The next step in the process will be that the prosecutors will prepare the case to present to a grand jury. In Texas, a grand jury is the first step of any criminal felony case. The grand jury kind of gives that approval of, yes, you can continue to prosecute, or they deny that and say, no, this case is not appropriate for further prosecution. We call the yes a true bill, we call the no a no bill. The grand jury presentation is not what we normally think of with a trial, where the prosecutors get to give their side and the defense gets to respond with their arguments and their witnesses. The grand jury process is more of a one-sided just presentation from the prosecutors. So they're able to summarize evidence. They don't have to bring witnesses to testify of their own knowledge, their own memories. The prosecutors are able to summarize all that information for the grand jury, or the prosecutors can bring in witnesses if they want to and have that testimony heard. The grand jury's job isn't to decide if they think the offense happened beyond a reasonable doubt. They're just there to determine if there's enough probable cause for the case to proceed through the justice system. If the grand jury true bills a case and says yes to further prosecution, at that point, the case will just start having court settings. The case will be set for court. The prosecutors and defense attorneys will meet and discuss various aspects of the case, potentially try to negotiate plea deals, make sure that the defense attorneys have all the evidence, and give each side an opportunity to kind of check in with the court and let the judge know what their plan is and that they're moving forward. This case may or may not end up going to a trial, maybe a jury trial, maybe not. It depends on kind of how those early court settings go. Right now, it's just too early to tell. The situation is clearly a very serious tragedy. We're talking about two very young men, one of whom was a straight A student, brother, son, who lost his life in the middle of the day at a track meet. The other, also a 17-year-old young man who committed a murder, is currently in jail, could potentially spend the rest of his life in prison for it. There really aren't any winners here, and it's truly sad all around. We're going to be staying informed as events progress, and we'll keep you updated. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave those down below. Otherwise, you can visit us at varghesestexas.com.